So I bought an Xbox for 4 games, none of which were Halo. A friend of mine had Halo, and by the time I picked up an Xbox in 2003, I had already played enough Halo that the game didn't really interest me anymore. My friends never did anything cool like play LAN parties or anything like that, and what little split-screen multiplayer we actually did play, they were always trying to stack the deck so they could win, doing things like playing shotties and snipers in big open maps so they didn't have to do things like gunfight against me. By the time I picked up my Xbox, my first PS2 had already died due to the dreaded disk read error, so the GameCube was the only current gen system I owned that worked at that time. The Xbox had recently dropped to a $150 price tag, so instead of picking up a new PS2, I picked up an Xbox instead out of annoyance about console unreliability on the PS2's part. For a while during the 6th generation, I was a GameCube and Xbox only gamer. I wouldn't pick up another PS2 until I picked up my first Slim in 2005. Previously I had played Deus Ex on the PS2. This was my first exposure to the Deus Ex series, which is why I still have a soft spot for the PS2 port of the game. I still love this version of the game. There are things I like about it more than even the original PC version, which I would later acquire used at EB Games. The PS2 version was the version that first introduced me to my love of this series, so I will always love that port of the game. My PC at the time was the very first PC I ever personally owned. It was a hand-me-down HP Office PC with a Slot 1 Pentium 3 running at 700 MHz. If you don't remember, Slot 1 processors were processors that clipped onto your motherboard through a Slot 1 socket like you would clip on a stick of RAM or a GPU today. It was also passively cooled by a heatsink and no fan. By that time, my graphics card was an AGP slot Radeon 9000, the one that I talked about in my Slave Zero review that my brother bought me for my birthday from Walmart. Yes, at Walmart, which, by the way, select Walmarts have started to sell PC components again. I'm not sure how many stores are doing this, but it was incredibly trippy to me to walk into a local Walmart here and see in the electronics section they were selling motherboards, power supplies, and 7800X3D processors. So while my Radeon 9000 at the time would have run this game, and I had 512 megabytes of DDR in my system so I had the RAM, my piddly 700 MHz Pentium 3 didn't meet the requirements. The recommended CPU for Invisible War was a 1.3 GHz processor. My hand-me-down Office PC wasn't capable of running the game, and I couldn't afford a new PC, which left me with one option. Deus Ex Invisible War was one of the 4 games I bought an Xbox for, along with Shenmue 2, Jet Set Radio Future, and Panzer Dragoon Orta. As you can tell, it was Sega who mostly influenced me to buy an Xbox. Personally, I love Invisible War. I always have and always will, but it is definitely a controversial sequel to one of the greatest games of all time due to certain design choices made in the game. I think the reason I loved it, despite obviously loving the original better, is that I played the Xbox version of the game and had the console experience with it versus the PC experience. Eidos forced Ion Storm to make the Xbox version the primary focus in development, meaning the PC version felt like more of an afterthought, feeling more like a console port rather than a PC sequel to one of the most celebrated PC games of all time. The PC version came out buggy, having mouse lag that made it basically unplayable, and a whole list of other problems also making the PC version unplayable out of the box. I don't own the physical PC version of the game, so I didn't go through the frustrations that PC players went through at that time. With the main focus on the Xbox version and various technical problems, it's no wonder that PC gamers are still the most ticked off at this game to this day. Eidos really did do them dirty by prioritizing the Xbox version over the PC version, but they were just a couple of years ahead of the curve in that regard. As I said in my Doom 3 review, in the 7th gen, developers started prioritizing consoles over the PC, even for long-running PC-only franchises. The main reason was the rampant piracy taking place in PC gaming at the time. At one time, there was speculation that PC gaming was going to die because of piracy. They were saying it wasn't even going to exist in a couple years' time. Developers started shifting towards the consoles as they weren't yet cracked or hacked, at least not on a large-scale basis, meaning that piracy wasn't going to interfere with the game's sales. Luckily for PC gamers, Steam came along and pretty much single-handedly saved PC gaming. This is what I meant when I said the Half-Life 2, Doom 3, Quake 4, Fear 2, Crysis era in PC gaming is, to me, the last great era in PC gaming, where the PC still had tons of great exclusive franchises that, even if they did later get console ports, were still primarily PC-focused franchises. The console ports were hand-me-down ports, not the primary focus. If you wanted to play Doom 3, Half-Life 2, Quake 4, Diablo, Command & Conquer, Civilization, Crysis, and so many more in their best best and right way to be played. You needed a PC. PC gaming had a separate and distinct flavor from console gaming. It was definitely a more sophisticated feeling platform with tons of deep Western RPGs, the best shooters around, the best real-time strategy games around, and so many other golden era franchises like Civilization and Black and White. PC gaming had its own separate and unique vibe. Nowadays, outside of the Switch, PC and consoles are flavorless download boxes with all the same games available with few standout exclusives. People playing the most popular PC games probably first played them on consoles, but then wanted higher frame rates so they could get even sweatier in online games. The 7th gen is the era of gaming where this flavorless blending of platforms started. If you don't agree, that's okay, but tell me, what was the first system you played Call of Duty 2 through 4 on? What was the first platform you played Fallout 3, Oblivion, or Skyrim on? What about Diablo 3 or Red Alert 3? Instead of getting offshoot ports or watered down ports, the console started to get direct versions of mainline PC franchises developed alongside the PC versions in the 7th gen, which is a practice that has largely carried on to this day. Invisible War was just a couple of years early on this. That being said, beyond the technical problems and the console first focus, there was a lot of watering down or consoling up, as PC gamers would call it, of the deeper RPG elements established in the original Deus Ex. For example, instead of giving players skill points to spend on various skills like lockpicking or swimming, on top of augmentations like life recovery and fast movement, Invisible War simplifies both skills and augmentations into a single biomod system. Hacking is no longer a skill to learn and level up through skill points, it's simply reduced to a biomod now. In order to make the game more mainstream accessible, they stripped out a lot of the more complex depth that made the original so good. I would say it's definitely more streamlined, but yes, not nearly as much depth. And without awarded skill points, there's a lot less reward for finding secret paths in the game now. I would say the watering down is definitely a valid complaint against Invisible War, and it's not like Xbox gamers who are already versed in Morrowind couldn't handle more depth to a game. But mainstream appeal means streamlining the depth out of a lot of games and making them more user-friendly or easier to play. Some of the other complaints PC gamers had I didn't share in, because remember, I played the PS2 version before the PC version. In many ways, the PS2 version of Deus Ex was the prototype for Invisible War because a lot of the changes made in Invisible War first showed up in the PS2 port. For example, moving to a simple health bar instead of having individual limb damage was first done in the PS2 version. PC gamers complained about this, but I personally don't miss having no legs in the middle of a hostile area while being completely out of healing items and having to snail crawl across the floor. The individual limb health system in the game was a cool idea, don't get me wrong, and it did lead to some hilarious situations, but I've never found it to be that practical overall. You can use a health pack on your entire body, or you can use it entirely on your left leg so you can move again. Again, it's a cool idea, and I understand why some people really liked its implementation in the original. I just didn't miss it that much in Invisible War, personally. I also like the simplified inventory system of the PS2 version and the ability to install augmentations on the fly instead of needing to find a medical bot to do it. In the PC version, I feel like I have to stop every 30 seconds and drop the stupid combat knife that everyone carries in this game for some reason out of my inventory. The PS2 version has one slot for every weapon in the game. Once picked up, you never have to pick it up again. The inventory is expanded, and once you pick up the combat knife, you never pick it up again, meaning there is no need to constantly pause the action for inventory management. The ability to install biomods on the fly instead of having to hunt down a medical bot was also a very nice touch, if you ask me. The PC version is obviously still better than the PS2 version and is geared more towards realism with its health and inventory system. But I will always love the PS2 port of this game as well, even with its smaller areas that are redesigned due to RAM limitations and a lot more and longer load times. The PS2 port is still one of my favorite PS2 games. It's still a masterclass in great game design. As I said, the PS2 port was the stepping stone for Invisible War, which was also hampered by Eidos's insistence that development focus on Xbox first, with the PC version being the hand-me-down port. I'm not trying to make light of valid complaints fans had against Invisible War just because I've always liked it. I can understand how and why the game was a huge letdown to a lot of fans of the original. I'm not trying to be dismissive of those complaints. It's not just the watering down of the deeper elements, but also being a much shorter game with smaller areas with more load times in between because the game had to cater to the Xbox, which had less RAM and more limitations to work with. And And also the biggest and I would say the most valid complaint against the game, the universal ammo system where every weapon uses the same ammo gauge, meaning that if you run out of ammo for one, you're out of ammo for all of them. The game just doesn't feel like the original in most ways outside of the multiple path open exploration elements. The exploration isn't open in a Morrowind sense, but each level is honeycombed with multiple paths that lead you to the same place. The game is linear in the sense that the story narrative will always take you to the same areas in every playthrough, but your route to get there and what other areas you explore along the way is entirely up to you. You can stealth through vents, picking locks and hacking terminals. You can enter the front of an area going full Rambo if you choose, or you can do multiple combinations of each. If you need to open a door, you can pick the lock or just blow the door up. Oftentimes there's also a hidden back way into that room. If Invisible War in no other way maintains the feel of the original, its open level designs do capture the spirit of the original Deus Ex. In the end, there was no way Invisible War was going to live up to the original. The original is one of the greatest games ever made, and following it up was going to be a tough task no matter what Ion Storm did. None of the other games in the series since Invisible War can live up to the original either. The original was as close to perfect as a game can get. Invisible War didn't have a chance of holding a candle to it no matter what they did. It was pretty much an impossible task. That being said, I still love this game. First and foremost, I associate it with getting a brand new console. My early Xbox gaming outside of playing games at a friend's place was Invisible War, Sega games, and Return to Castle Wolfenstein, which was on sale for cheap when I bought my Xbox, so I picked it up alongside Invisible War. I would say that those who first played Invisible War on the Xbox probably have a higher opinion of the game than those who played it on the PC at the time, just on the merit of having a working game out of the box alone. The game was also designed with the Xbox in mind, so it is a more stable experience on that system. The original Unreal Engine had an amazing atmosphere to it. I can't really describe it, something about the way it looked. The original Unreal had an amazing gothic sci-fi art direction, which is still visually appealing to me to this day. The original Deus Ex also has a uniquely different atmosphere about it. There's something about the graphics in Unreal Engine 1 that seems to give every game that runs on it an extra atmospheric look to them. Unreal 1 is still a beautiful engine to me, and it represents a golden age of PC gaming. The original Deus Ex has an amazing atmosphere, helped along with an amazing soundtrack to go along with it. Invisible War runs on a heavily modified Unreal 2 engine, and while the atmospheric feel is definitely different from the original thanks to the jump in technology, I also very much enjoy the atmosphere in Invisible War as well. It doesn't capture the same atmosphere of the original, but I still love that dark sci-fi atmosphere. I love the atmosphere in this game. There's little to no music in the game, mostly ambient tracks at best, but I think that helps the atmosphere out a bit. It's a quiet, dark, dreary, futuristic world presented in this game. While I would have loved more awesome tunes like the amazing title screen music in the game, the more low-key soundtrack helps the ambiance of the game in my opinion. As much as I would have loved having as good a soundtrack as the original, I do like the more low-key sound design of Invisible War. Invisible War follows the exploits of Alex D and takes place 20 years after the events of the first game. It continues the storyline of one of the 3 choosable endings from the original game. Like the original, the game tells a tangled web of multiple invisible factions at war with each other, allowing players to choose which one to ally themselves with along the way. The beginning of the game starts out with a cool cutscene where the entire city of Chicago is wiped off the map in a terrorist attack, and starts from the safety of the Tarsus Academy in Seattle, where Alex is evacuated to, which quickly finds itself under attack by a terrorist force. Alex escapes the facility and thus starts the rest of the journey. Like the original, the story climaxes with multiple endings chosen by the player depending on which faction they choose at the end of the game. There is a possibility of 4 different endings to the game. The storytelling is well done and easy to follow, with multiple mini-stories intertwined through NPC characters offering new side missions throughout the game. For example, in Seattle, the Pequod's coffee shop manager offers to pay you money to go down to Lower Seattle and destroy the coffee inventory of the rival Queequeg's coffee shop. When you get to Lower Seattle, the Queequeg's manager offers you a reward to hack the WTO zoning computer computer to allow a Queequeg shop to be opened in Upper Seattle. This is a completely optional side mission where I like to go and destroy the coffee supply of Queequegs to collect the reward from the Pequod's manager, but then I also screw over the Pequod's manager by allowing the zoning of the Queequegs in Upper Seattle. That way they all lose, but I still get paid. The game is full of fun but optional side missions like this, with each city center acting like its own hub world to explore and interact with NPC characters, while also exploring and finding hidden areas and secret paths to take. While I do agree with the complaint that the city areas feel way too small and cramped thanks to the Xbox first focus of the development, featuring small, cramped feeling cities instead of feeling like major metropolitan areas, there is still a lot to explore and find in this game. So while the game does fail to successfully simulate large city landscapes, feeling more cramped and cozy in nature, the areas are still honeycombed with hidden areas to explore. The level designs are still excellent and a lot of care and thought went into them. If nothing else in Invisible War felt like the original, the level designs surely did, even if they were smaller in scale. The story design also feels a lot like the original as well. I'll just be straight, I'm not a storyline gamer, especially as of late. If anything, I suffer from what GamePro forum alum Raid 6 rightfully pointed out to me as story fatigue. Modern games are such overproduced productions that throw hours upon hours of overdone story sequences your way. Maybe I've just gotten less patient as I've gotten older, but I've quit playing entire games because they slow roll into the gameplay elements, throwing overdone story element after overdone story element your way. At which point I find myself yelling at the game, "Just let me play the freaking game already! I just want to play a game! I bought a game so I could play a game, not watch it!" So yeah, story fatigue is a good name for it. I am sick of the overdone production. Just let me play a game. Especially since most gaming storylines are forgettable anyways. However, even though I am not a story-focused gamer, the games that make storyline a gameplay mechanic, taking advantage of the fact that gaming is supposed to be an interactive medium and not a static form of visual storytelling like movies, are the games that do storyline right, in my opinion. Like the original, how the story plays out depends on which decisions the players make throughout the game. The story is linear in the fact that you will always end up back on Liberty Island in the end of the game. However, the story in between is up to the player to uncover. Like the original, there are whole side stories and whole areas of the game you won't find in your first or even second playthrough of it. So while the main narrative does end up in the same areas, it's the smaller storylines or side quests in between that the player must discover. That makes the storyline an interactive part of the game. That is, a gameplay mechanic itself. I prefer games that offer an active story experience instead of a passive one, making the player an active participant in how the story unfolds, versus a passive storyline that unfolds identically every time. You know, the kind of storylines that take the player out of the gameplay experience, usually every couple of seconds or like a minute. It feels like every other second you're seeing a stupid cutscene. The ones that lay on thick, forced, overproduced, melodramatic story cutscenes or piss-boring walking sims thrown on otherwise mediocre third-person shooter gameplay to disguise the fact that you're playing something mediocre. After you escape Tarsus and are released upon Seattle, the open story choices start appearing through each faction contacting Alex and trying to get him or her, depending on which player model you choose at the beginning of the game, to run missions for them. It is up to the player to decide which missions they take or what actions they take on those missions, and even choose which mission actions they choose moral or not. An example of this is in Cairo, where the WTO asks Alex to destroy the Nassif greenhouse because it is producing what they consider to be illegal food. That is, food production they have no control over. Yet, it is the main source of food for the local population. You can be the corporate stooge and destroy the food, thus giving the WTO sole control of food production in the area, or you can break into the greenhouse to explore it and pilfer whatever items you want, but then choose not to destroy the food production in the end. Like the original Deus Ex, another big factor of the open choice design is the freedom to make moral choices or not. You can choose to be evil, killing everyone and everything, or try and play the game with a mostly no-kill run, choosing instead to knock out enemies with the stun baton or tranquilizer darts. I say a mostly no-kill run because the enemies at the end of the game give you no choice but to kill them because they explode when their life is drained. I guess that's one bad part about the game is those who prided themselves on doing no-kill runs in the original were unable to reproduce that in the sequel. On top of the choice to kill or not kill, players can choose to be stealthy, running guns blazing, or a combination of both. The game's level designs and specific problems also provide a multitude of choices to the player. While I have played through the game enough to have my own favorite biomods and favorite routes to take, not only do the biomods allow the player to customize their attributes, using either the official biomods or black market biomods, which give you things like hacking or having melee attacks that cause EMP damage against bots, but the mods also allow the player to cater to a stealth approach versus a non-stealth approach, or play as a good guy or bad guy. Like the original, you can play it as a good guy or a bad guy, going on a full GTA style killing spree if you want. If you choose to go the mass murder route, the game will still prevent you from killing story important characters by protecting them behind glass or putting them in areas where your weapons are disabled, thus preventing players from not being able to progress the game by killing story important characters. The level designs also cater to how you choose to play. As I already mentioned, there are always multiple routes into every area of the game, so you don't have to take the most direct route if you don't want to. There's usually a hidden ventilation shaft, an underground sewer entrance, or a window you can use to enter the building secretly. The choice is up to the player, and it adds a reward for full exploration of the area and a reason to play through the game multiple times to see everything it has to offer. The level designs do recapture the open exploration elements that made the designs in the original so good. Similar care and thought was put into this game. Some of the other specific problems in the game are also up to the player to decide. As a quick example, the game may present you with a locked weapon cabinet. You can use your multi-tools, which combine both the multi-tool and lockpicks from the original into one tool now, to pick the lock on the cabinet, or you can just throw a grenade and blow the top off the cabinet. Doors can be blown off their hinges or lock-picked for stealth. Sometimes codes to doors, keypads, or computer logins can be found on data cubes lying around, or computers can simply just be hacked if you have the hacking ability. Like the PS2 port, Invisible War takes away the requirement to manually enter computer logins by hand, a feature that was a fun interactive element of the original on the PC. They just automatically get entered in if you find the data cube with the logins on them. This is another stepping stone feature the PS2 port of the original did that was carried over into Invisible War, but I can sympathize with fans of the original in how it kind of made you feel like a hacker to manually type in logins and passwords into the computer. I just always found hacking more convenient myself. I guess it depends on how much you like this aspect of the original game as to whether automatically filling in computer logins is a plus or strike against Invisible War. Now, the biggest complaint against the game among fans is one I do agree with. While I still love this game despite the watering down of the deeper elements of the original, and because I experienced it on the Xbox and not the buggier PC release, I do agree that the universal ammo system in the game is a terrible design idea. This was one of the largest complaints, and rightfully so. Every firearm in the game uses the exact same pool of ammo. If you run out of ammo with one firearm, you run out of ammo with all of them, making guns like the flamethrower completely impractical to use because of how fast it drains ammo. The idea was to make it so players didn't have to juggle between different ammo types for each individual weapon in the game and could just use one ammo pool for all of them. This can lead to frustration in the game being completely out of ammo for your firearms in the middle of a hostile environment, especially near the end of the game where enemies are complete bullet sponges. The universal ammo was a dumb idea. However, it's never been a deal breaker for me with this game because I tend to play the game as a mostly no-kill experience, meaning I tend to run up on enemies and use the baton to thump them in the head until they are unconscious. In fact, the melee weapons, the baton and sword, are the most effective weapons in the game. When paired with the EMP biomod, which does damage to bots, it makes them even more effective against bot enemies than even human opponents. The EMP biomod, when fully leveled up through finding more black market canisters to upgrade it, not only does damage to the bots, but instantly reprograms them to be an ally. Walk up to a turret or walking tank, tap it once with the stun baton, and then watch as it takes out any enemies in the area. Generally, I save the ammo for shooting tranq darts at enemies to knock them out over a distance, or to use the SMG that's been modded with a weapon mod that delivers EMP damage to quickly take out turrets or patrol bots from a distance. The weapon mod system is another cool feature which allows players to add extra abilities to the firearms they find in the game. For example, I like putting the silencer and glass breaker mod on my sniper rifle in the game. The silencer is self-explanatory, but the glass breaking mod silently disintegrates glass window panes when they are shot. Certain windows in the game are set up with with alarms that go off when shattered, so adding the mod to the sniper rifle is a silent way to slip through the windows in the game without arousing suspicion. By the end of the game, I do tend to collect more weapon and bio mods than I have use for. However, this means that there is ample opportunity in the game to change your mod choices multiple times before the end. Overall, yes, this game doesn't live up to the original and didn't include a lot of the features the devs were planning to implement during development thanks to the Xbox version being prioritized. That being said, I've still always enjoyed Invisible War. The Xbox version is the most stable way to play the game, as I've said before. The load times are quite a bit longer than the PC version. There are still some wonky physics here and there, and the Xbox version freezes for a second every time a spider bot is thrown in the game. But even when comparing it to the PC version I bought off of Steam, it is by far more stable than the Steam version I bought of the game, which is a shame because it was never given backwards compatibility with the Xbox 360 or Xbox One. The Xbox version still remains only on the original Xbox to this day. Even Thief Deadly Shadows is at least backwards compatible on the Xbox 360, but Invisible War never got the same treatment. I'm not sure if there have been driver improvements that have made a difference, but when I first bought Invisible War off Steam, the game would black screen after the intro video when starting a new game. I was just like, great. I just bought a broken game off of Steam. This is why I laugh whenever I see PC tech channels, which if you watch one tech channel video, YouTube will then forever suggest tech channel video content to you forever. In their PC versus console videos, tout backwards compatibility to thousands of old games as a giga-chad feature of PC versus plebeian console backwards compatibility, which is really just as simple as holding onto your old console so you can play your old games anyway. Yes, there are still plenty of old PC games that work just fine on modern hardware. For example, WinQuake, which is Windows 95 Quake that I installed and it ran just fine on my Windows 10 PC. However, for every WinQuake, there's an Invisible War, a Knights of the Old Republic, or a Time Shift where you purchase a game and then have to scour the internet finding ways to get the game to actually run on modern hardware. Luckily, Knights of the Old Republic has been patched recently and runs okay now. And Invisible War has started running too. I don't remember a patch that fixed it, so maybe it was GPU driver updates that fixed it finally. But at least it runs now on all my rigs, whether I'm using an Nvidia or AMD card. I even tried it on my Linux Mint PC I'm using as an experiment with Linux, and it runs under the Proton layer just fine. However, the display is stretched too far, so I was unable to do things like drop items out of my inventory. It runs on Linux though. On all three of my Windows 10 computers it runs just fine now, with two caveats. No matter the rig I am running, the exception being the Linux PC, the game now changes my desktop resolution to the game's resolution, so it changes it to 1600 by 1200, and with the exception of my laptop, it also default changes the refresh rate to 30 frames per second on my monitor in Windows. It took me a month to figure out the refresh rate change the game made to my Windows settings. I could tell something was different with my screen, I just couldn't tell exactly what it was when playing other games or watching YouTube. On my current rig, when running on my RX 7900 GRE with Radeon Super Resolution upscaling the game to 4K, I've never seen this game look so good. The unfortunate thing being it doesn't run as good as it should because of the 30Hz refresh rate it defaults to. I haven't played around with the available visual tweakers for the game to see if I can stop it from changing those settings. I still find it perfectly playable in this form because it's not a fast-paced shooter. In fact, the combat is pretty straightforward and basic, but the combat wasn't great in the original either. It was all the other stuff that made it great. The PC version of the game still does occasionally shut off for no good reason and even has wonkier physics than the Xbox version in parts. Overall, like I said, it's less stable than the Xbox version, but with way faster load times. Generally, I didn't run into a lot of freeze-ups of the game, it just randomly shut off on me here and there when recording this playthrough. I am happy the game runs now because I was super bummed out when I first bought it and all it would do is black screen after the intro. While there is still plenty of room for improvements to be made in how it runs on modern hardware, I'm just happy it at least runs now. It runs well enough and plays well enough even with a lesser frame rate. And with modern GPU upscaling, whether Nvidia's upscaling or Radeon Super Resolution, it looks better than I've ever seen it look. Graphically, on the Xbox when I first got the system in the game, I thought this was a beautiful game. I've seen some people comment that it's an ugly game nowadays, but for the time, a modified Unreal 2 engine with its detailed textures, excellent lighting effects, and all that glorious bump mapping or normal mapping. I was incredibly impressed with the visual quality of the game, plus I had just jumped up from the PS2 and GameCube, so anything on the Xbox looked excellent by comparison. Aside from the quality, I really loved the atmosphere. Invisible War is still one of my favorite Xbox games to this day, and speaking of Xbox, I thought I should shout out 2 other games that do similar things in nature to Invisible War that you should also check out if you have a chance. The first needs little introduction to Xbox fans. The Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay has some similar gameplay elements to Invisible War. Checking to see, it appears that Riddick is not available on either Steam or GOG at the moment, despite having a physical PC release at the time. However, it was included for free on the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions of its sequel, Assault on Dark Athena. That's a 2 games for 1 deal if you ever pick that version up. Riddick is one of the best games on the original Xbox and one of the best looking games as well. The other game is Tron 2.0 Killer App, which plays a lot like System Shock or Deus Ex in the Tron universe. I recently bought the PC version off of Steam, and I'm surprised that I don't hear more about this game from retro PC gamers. The Xbox version, which added multiplayer and some other things over the PC versions, I expect not to hear much about, as it slipped completely under the radar on the system. I mean, Xbox was a system of Halo. If it wasn't Halo, no one cared about it. There's a lot of underrated and hidden shooters on that system because it was all about Halo, and maybe a couple of other games that were popular at the time. For Tron 2.0, I would consider it an underrated or hidden gem for that system. However, the PC version came out and got good review scores and a lot of attention at the time, but people have seemingly forgotten about the game in the years since then. You hear about System Shock and Deus Ex a lot from old school PC gamers, and rightfully so, but why so little love for Tron nowadays? It's a solid System Shock style romp from Monolith Games. The bottom line, I think that fans of the Deus Ex franchise have come back around to Invisible War recently and declared it as not as bad as it was made out to be at the time. Some people will never forgive this game, but for others, once the initial disappointment subsided, they can now come back to it and give it a fairer shot. I still love this game, but have yet to play any of the more recent games in the series despite owning Human Revolution and Mankind Divided now, so I really can't rank how it stacks up in the series, having only played the first 2 games in the series and kind of play tested the other 2. That being said, I've always enjoyed this game despite its flaws and the many ways it didn't live up to the impossibly high standards set by the original game. Even with Eidos's meddling in the development and making the Xbox the focus, Ion Storm still managed to give us an excellently designed, story-driven open exploration game where the player still has the ultimate choice in how to explore the world presented in it. The PC version is more glitchy and harder to run to this day. The Xbox version is the more stable version, and we who experienced it on the Xbox over the initial PC release probably had a much better time with it. If you're one of those fans who will never forgive this game, nothing I can say will change your mind. However, for the rest, Deus Ex Invisible War is a controversial sequel to one of the greatest PC first-person shooter slash RPG hybrids of all time that certainly didn't live up to the hype of the original, but still manages to be a great game in its own right. For some of you, you should give it a second chance if it'll run on your PC, that is. For everyone else, you should probably play the original game first in order for the story to make sense, because this is a direct sequel to the original, and if you don't know the story of the original, you probably will be lost in the second one. On a depth level, I would put it at the same gameplay depth as, say, BioShock, in how it took previously complex gameplay designs and made them more accessible slash watered down slash mainstream to appeal to a wider audience. Invisible War failed to live up to the original, but it also succeeds in some of its design elements to recapture the feeling of the original. If you want something that's on the same level of accessibility as the original BioShock and BioShock 2, you will probably find enjoyment in this game.
I know you probably didn't want to do that, but thanks.
No problem.
We have our differences. Maybe I care a little more about some things, purity of the soul and all that, but that doesn't mean we can't get along.
Think you can find your way out?
I got myself in here, didn't I?
Good luck.
Yeah, I can find my way out. Hey, look at me again. I was right, wasn't I? You're modified. You're a stinking defiler. Just go ahead and try it.